Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay. And today we've got the Adidas Adizero Boston 10. Now, this is quite an anticipated release just for how radical it is, and it's possibly the most radical upgrade of a shoe from the previous version. Perhaps in my opinion it's perhaps the worst upgrade of a shoe that I can recall, just because of the fact it's just increased in weight, and the Boston's gone from being a very lightweight trainer that you could almost race in to something that's like a heavy clumpy shoe, more aligned to a sort of a cross between a Pegasus and a Zoom Fly 3 from Nike. It's almost if Adidas have decided that they needed to copy Nike's style of having racing shoes that are great and everyday trainers that are absolutely terrible. So I think the Boston 10, long live the Boston as we say, is now rather dead. And perhaps unfortunately the name should be given to something else. But anyway, let's be a bit more objective and go through things in a bit more detail. First of all, let's have a look at me running in it, and I'll come back and explain a sort of slightly different approach to my running shoe reviews going forward. So I thought to myself, what do I actually look for when I'm looking for running shoe reviews? What's actually most important to me? Well, probably most important to me is how well they fit, how cushioned they are in terms of like how am I going to respond after the run, whether they're sort of firm, soft or hard, just for an objective opinion, and then how fast I think I'm going to go for them, and then just basically an overall sort of feeling of whether I actually like the shoe or not. So the ultimate combination perhaps in a shoe is that one is ultra cushioned but ultra fast. So that's probably why the next percent is probably my favourite shoe at the moment, because it is a very cushioned shoe, but equally it's the fastest shoe that I've got at the moment. So let's go through the specs first of all of the Boston 10. Now the drop is 8.5 millimeters with a 39.5 at the back and 31 at the front. That's in the UK 8.5 standard size. And Adidas give the standards weight in that size as 286, whereas in my size at UK 12.5 is actually a whopping 365 grams. That compares to the Boston 9, the previous version, which was around about 295. So it's sort of grown 70 grams. And the shoe has changed somewhat from being a lightweight trainer that you can almost race in to rather more of an everyday trainer, as a bit of a training companion. I think Adidas are trying to build this a bit like, say, the Zoom Fly 3 or the Tempo Next Percent, which to me were kind of disappointing shoes in a way. I thought they were just rather heavy and firm, especially the Zoom Fly 3. I thought that was kind of one of the worst shoes I picked up recently. So to find a shoe that is very similar to that on foot was rather disappointing. Having said that, the fit of the shoe is actually not too bad. Now, Adidas, as you may remember, only go up to UK 12.5. Now, really, I think my foot is more akin to a 13. So I won't try and dwell on the fact that these possibly are a fraction too small for me. So when I talk about how well they fit, I think in terms of more like the lockdown, how it fits across the midfoot, and just the fact that I perhaps could do with a few more mils up top. Well, it's not really been entirely helpful to everyone else. I just wish that Adidas would do a 13 or a 13.5 at least, and then I'd have a bit more toe box room. But these are okay. I've been for 3 runs in these. I haven't got any black toes or any blisters or anything, so they do feel a bit tight, but I can perfectly run and ball in them. And I had run in Boston's 12.5 for years. In fact, Boston is probably the shoe that I've run in most miles in the last 10 years of anyone, which is probably why I'm kind of disappointed that the name has been tarnished by this monstrosity. But anyway, so we've got an engineered mesh for the upper, and interestingly a bit of suede across the top here, which you don't see suede too much in shoes these days. Also a bit of suede across the top of the eyelet chain. We've got 6 eyelets here, and also an additional one if you want to do a double knot, which I haven't done. And the tongue is a gusseted tongue, people will be glad to hear. There's actually a bit of padding where the Adidas logo is, which is quite nice, especially if you want to do the double lock. I did try that and decided I didn't really need to do it. The legs to length is not too bad actually, which is partly why I didn't do the double lock, because even in my sort of fairly narrow foot, I've still haven't got too much there. Certainly not the voluminous amount of laces you get, say, in a typical Hoka shoe. On the side of the foot here, we've got a rather see-through engineered mesh there, which is quite thin, but it's almost like a double layering because of the gusseted tongue behind it. So I think it's quite a breathable shoe, but the suede obviously is going to catch a bit of water here. I did actually go out tonight when it was a bit damp, and it's still a bit damp from that. The heel counter is actually quite firm there, sort of quite a plastic firm cup there. And the Achilles tab is very well cushioned. I haven't noticed any problems with my Achilles. There's not really much of a flare backwards there, is it? But there is a bit of a cutaway there. And it's quite well padded actually on the back here. So there's quite a lot of comfort in the shoe, which perhaps that's increasing to the weight. Now the tongue does come out, and here we go, a nice sort of orangey light strike one. I actually weighed this, it's actually only 15 mils, so it's a lot lighter insole than some of the other Adidas ones in the past. And it's a very sort of nice, slick, smooth surface. So I think as an insole, it's not too bad. So in terms of my new ratings, I'm going to give the fit an overall score of 7 out of 10. Perhaps for me, it's more like a 6 out of 10 by the fact it's a bit short. But I don't want to knock it down just with the fact that my feet aren't quite aligned with Adidas's thinking on what runners should be in. So yeah, 7 out of 10. If I compare that to the highest score I think I've had of late, is perhaps the Puma Liberate Nitro, which I put as a 9 out of 10. That just fitted me like a glove across the midfoot and had a bit more room in the toe box. I just thought that was a great lockdown. And that was surprisingly a shoe that well under £100 as well. When I reviewed the shoes that I bought this year, I think 7 out of 10 was kind of like a sort of an average score. So in terms of how does that compare to shoes that had a worse fit, well I think I marked down the Adizero Artist and the Rebel 2 at a 6. So I thought they came up sort of quite wide and I had to tug them in quite a lot. But obviously for wider feeted people that might be better fit. So in terms of midsole, you've got the ordinary sort of light strike material underneath, and you've got this thinner layer of Light Strike Pro. I guess it's a bit like the Turbo 2 in that respect, where you've got a combination of the premium Zoom X with the less premium React foam, which is also kind of similar but even worse, because this light strike stuff with this quantity of it just feels really firm. It's perhaps the firmest shoe that I've bought for quite a long time, and that's why it does remind me of the Zoom Fly 3, because that was also incredibly firm as well. I felt like more like a sort of wearing a boot. I wouldn't say that the Boston 10 is quite as firm as the Zoom Fly 3, but certainly getting on that way. In compensation though, it actually felt reasonably cushioned. Once you got used to the fact that it felt like slap. It was actually quite a noisy shoe, I thought, when I was running in it. But actually for cushioning, in terms of recovery after runs, so far I've done an 8-mile run on Saturday where I did a hard sort of tempo back. And then I did a long run yesterday on the road on a rather hilly circuit, and then a sort of like a steady one tonight for about 10k. And my legs sort of feel okay. So although it's quite a firm shoe, I actually sort of rate the cushioning actually not too bad. And I suppose you'd kind of expect that with such a high stack. So for cushioning, I'm going to give it 7 out of 10. Now, in terms of cushioning, the highest score that I think I've given will be to the Invincible, because that just sort of was like his maximum cushion shoe. When you went out in that one, your legs could be completely beaten up and you'd still feel okay. So I gave that one a 10 out of 10 in comparison. Now, in contrast, I gave the Puma Liberate Nitro a 5 out of 10 for cushioning, because that's more of a sort of a minimalist shoe. So there's always a trade-off between these things. You've got a higher stack, you're going to probably have better cushioning. Lower stack, you may have a bit more response and speed. So we come now to my third new rating, which is what I'm going to call a speed score out of 10. This is how well I think I can actually go in them. And this one I'm only going to give a very middling 5. I would say something like the Next Percent was kind of the ultimate speed shoe, so I'll give that a 10. And the Liberate Nitro I've given a score of 8. So I think that's a very fast shoe in certain circumstances, but maybe not as an outright fast shoe to the Next Percent. So 5 is obviously a disappointing score, and those runs that I did, when I first put them on, I felt I was struggling to even run 8-minute miles. And I did actually pick up the pace, so I was going for a course record on Strava. I needed about 7-minute miling, and I actually managed to do 6:40, but it felt like it was just sort of like hard work. I mean, it was bouncing along okay, but each stride felt like it was kind of hard to get going again. I think that weight really pushes me down. I mean, maybe in a smaller shoe that weight might be so bad, but even in the standard size, it's 286 grams, which I think for most people is a lot heavier than you might imagine. I mean, in the Next Percent, even my UK 13 is about 250 grams, so we're talking a shoe that's well over 100 grams heavier than that. So when they say it feels like a racing shoe every day, well, it isn't really, is it? Because over 100 grams more, you really are then going into everyday trainer category rather than racing. And it might have a racing look at it, but that's about it. And in fact, if you compare the outsole on the Adios Boston 10 to the Adios Pro 2 that I've just got in, I haven't actually run in them yet, and you can kind of see how similar it is. You've got those 3 energy rods on both. I think in the Boston 10, these are basically like a plastic one, whereas in this one, I think they're a proper carbon one. But you can see that the general design of these two is quite similar. The Adios Pro 2 does seem like a narrower shoe on the outsole, which kind of makes sense for a racing shoe, whereas this one seems slightly wider. But you can certainly see that the vibe of these two designs are very, very similar. But this one is about 285 grams, something like that. In fact, it actually seems to have lost a bit of weight from the Adios one, so that's promising. So I look forward to running in that and doing a shoe off and see how they all go. But at least in terms of grip, you're not going to have any problems there. Now, I always think with outsoles, I know some reviewers like to sort of wax lyrical about outsoles and even rate them. Well, I always think, well, when's the last time I actually fell over in a shoe? I think I fell over, tripped up in the woods a few years ago, and that was more the fact I just hit something, a twig, and fell over. I don't think I've ever really fallen over in a road shoe, even in the wet. I mean, if you go around a corner, what I typically try to do is actually sort of take it a bit gingerly, get around the corner and get going again. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that certain reviewers have actually fallen over in shoes when they haven't been going at race pace. So I think, unless the outsole is like a slippery slope to disaster, I'm not going to give that one a rating. But certainly this one, perfectly adequate. And I've been out in sort of quite wettish conditions the last few days, and as I said, I didn't fall over, and didn't have any time to think I was going to. But so it's been obviously quite warm recently. So when it's been rainy, you kind of think, well, maybe there's a danger of any shoe you go out in after the rain and the hot weather, because you're going to get quite a lot of oil on the ground. So was it really the shoe, or was it really the conditions? So I was a bit sceptical of those sort of analysis. So overall, I just think that I'm just a bit disappointed that this Boston shoe is no longer a Boston. In fact, the Adios 6 I've got there, the black shoe there, I think that's actually more like the Boston of old, because the Adios 6 is not really like an Adios, it's more like a Boston, and this Boston 10 is more like an everyday trainer. Now, maybe that's okay for some people, but you're kind of thinking, well, there's only so many shoes of 360 grams I need to have for like supposedly tempo shoes. I mean, when you compare that to say the Endorphin Speed that comes in around about 280 grams and has that sort of like slightly softer cushioning, just feels like more fun to run in, and that just sort of does feel like a shoe that you could potentially take in a race. Whereas this one, well, yeah, it may look like a race shoe, but, well, it isn't. I mean, I was thinking, well, if you took one of my friends with equal fitness and they wore this one and I wore an X%, then I'd be rather disappointed if I didn't beat them just down to the shoes alone. But yeah, so I quite like the look of it as well, and the colourway. I do like this white colour. Maybe not the best colourway in the current sort of wet and miserable weather, but yeah, it is nice to look at, and it's always nice to try an Adidas shoe. Bit of a big departure from them. Personally, I don't think this is really for me. Maybe for other people, but in terms of would I recommend this shoe, well, basically no. I think it's just a bit of a experimental shoe by Adidas. They were experimenting with having a massively increased stack. They're almost copying everyone else, really. That's the trouble these days. I think Nick Simmons made the comment that whether you like Nike or not, they are setting the benchmark, and everyone else is just basically copying these high stack shoes, and haven't really quite, at least in the next percent Alpha Fly category, haven't really quite landed in one yet. I'm keen to try out the Adios Pro 2, and I've also got the Saucony Endorphin Speed 2 as well, which I think I'm expecting to be very similar to the Speed 1, but by all accounts the Adidas Pro 2 is a bit different from the Pro 1, so I think the next step is for me to do a shoe off with all these Adidas ones. I always repeat the test I did last year to see whether paying over the odds for these shoes is actually beneficial. Because don't forget, I picked up the Adios 6 at a discount for £77, whereas this one, they didn't actually have any discounts available. And they've actually sold out on the Adidas website. I'm not sure they actually made too many. So I think it's a bit of a trick from Adidas, because I did notice that the Adios Pro 2, bizarrely, has got all sizes available, which, considering the Adidas Pro 1 was almost like gold dust, they've almost gone like from one extreme to the other, almost made too many. I think the problem is now they've got this Primex shoe, which I also didn't manage to get because I think that's probably a bit overkill for me. I think to buy a shoe that's probably half a size too small for £220 was actually illegal technically for races and all that stack. And especially having tried this Boston stack now, I'm not entirely convinced that the Adidas stack is what I like in a shoe. I think if I want all this stack, I would sort of prefer like the sort of recovery type feeling of the Invincible. So my overall score, which isn't going to be just an average of all the other scores, I think my overall score is going to be based on all these factors, but also a bit of a fun factor. I do actually like running in this shoe, and the honest opinion is not really. I mean, it's sort of grown me a bit after 3 runs, and I actually forced myself to run it tonight rather than these Adidas Pros that I've got in, just to sort of give it extra perspective to this review, and I've actually now got up to about 25 miles in it. So I think that's a reasonable amount of miles to give you a proper opinion. I don't really like these sort of reviews where, you know, people allegedly go out and, you know, have they done more than 2 strides in a shoe. So I think my overall score is a 5 out of 10, which obviously isn't great, is it? And clearly all the shoes, without scoring any other shoe, are going to get far more than 5 out of 10. So is this a shoe that I'd recommend you buy? Well, probably not, but if you like a shoe that isn't a Boston, but you like the fact that it looks like a shoe, you want more of an everyday trainer, you like a very firm shoe, you like a high stack shoe. I think on the plus side of the high stack, it was actually quite stable. That was a bit of a plus point to it, because it's such a firm shoe, that does make it quite stable. So I think even if you were a sort of heavy pronator, this might be almost might be a mild stability shoe for you. But certainly one for me that I was kind of rather disappointed. You know, I feel like the Boston line is now rather dead from what I used to use it as my everyday trainer for lightweight purposes that I could get up a bit of speed on. I did a few strides in this tonight, and yeah, it got sort of going downhill, but it was just sort of hard work towing off. You just feel like there was so much sort of firm sponge under your foot. It just wasn't a great feeling at all. But yeah, it was sort of did okay, but for £130, rather disappointing. So there you go. I hope you found this review interesting. Like and subscribe and all that, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one then. Bye. Oh, and as a bonus, I'm going to put some footage of my thoughts out on the runs, because always the thoughts when you just actually finished a run, it's always quite telling, I think. So I'll put that through as a bit of bonus footage, and some interesting footage there of Waverley Abbey. I thought it was a nice little find away. Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay, and welcome again to Dunsfeld. And I come today to test out the Boston 10s that I've got on my feet for the very first run. And here they are. Now, as you can see, they're rather white, and it's been raining all day, so not quite sure how white they'll be at the end of the run, but they feel very high stacks. Feel slightly more room than they do in the Adios 6. I'm hopeful. So I've run nearly 4.5 miles now in the Boston 10, and I'm not sure I've got anything good to say about it really. The Boston line seems to be dead. Long live the Boston, as they say. So this, when I weighed it, is about 360 grams in the UK 12.5. That's gone from just under 300, so they've added, well, best part, 65, 70 grams. They've also added a heft load of Light Strike ordinary material, which is basically their cheap stuff, basically. So if you used to say, complain about the Boost shoes being heavy, well, they replaced it by Light Strike and added 70 grams. So it's very, very firm. All these sort of rods in them, I think, are just gimmicks because they're sort of plastic ones. I think they basically tried to make a cheap Adios Pro, and a bit like the Tempo Next, sort of make out this is the same sort of thing and like a training companion. But it's just I think it's just a rip-off, basically. I like the shoes, sort of like to look at, and but I think these days they sort of like turn the Boston into like a Pegasus. It's the same sort of weight, it's almost the same sort of feel to the React. You know, why do people want these high stack shoes with like very firm midsoles when things like the Endorphin Speed in like a nice lightweight shoe and shoe of the year? So what exactly are Adidas thinking about? I really don't know. And they sort of killed the Adios 6 and they turned it into a Boston. So in that sense, the Adios 6 is probably now the Boston, but the Adios line is dead, and then you probably have to get a Takumi Sony if you wanted a racing flat. But yeah, rather disappointing. I need to run back now. I was going to go for a course record about sub 7 minute pace, but I was barely able to get up to 8 minute pace there.
I know I'm just feeling tired or whatever, but I've got about 4 miles to run back, so better head back. But yeah, a bit of a moan, but very disappointing shoe. I wouldn't waste your money, to be honest. So I hope you can probably still see me, maybe just hear me. Well, sometimes appearance is deceptive. I went for the course record back from Alwood Crossways back to Dunsfold. It's about 2.7k, a bit up and down, probably slightly downhill, if truth be told. And well, yeah, I think maybe it's a case of like when you just get on with the run, you forget about the shoes. They kind of felt a bit clumpy, but once I got going, I was okay. But I think that was perhaps more my fitness or what was there left of it than the shoes. So I can't really say my opinions of them has improved greatly, but there has a bit, I suppose, because anytime you get a course record, even though it wasn't a particularly difficult one, then got to be welcome. I just couldn't help thinking though that in a shoe like the Next Percent or the Endorphin Pro, even the Adios Pro, then that would have felt probably a bit easier, certainly getting up the hills as well. And I do have just a bit of a toe box problem with the length, but yeah, we'll come back inside and go over the specs a bit more. And they are actually still reasonably white, surprisingly. It wasn't as wet as I thought. Okay, I'm about to do my second run in the Adidas Adizero Boston 10s. I'm kind of equating them to a bit of a Zoomfly 3 come Pegasus now. But I did a sort of a run yesterday where it was sort of steady, then I had a hard effort. Initially I sort of didn't like them at all, but I actually got a course record at 6:40 pace for just short of 5k, so it can't have been too bad. I'm going to do sort of my long sort of Sunday run now. I'll say longer, try and get up to 10 miles, because 10 miles will bring up to 50 miles for the week, which is the first time I've done that for a couple of months, so that'd be a good target. It's quite hilly around here. This is at Waverley House near Farnham. I think I've actually run here before, so I think it'll be a nice sort of test of the how good they are on the hills. And because they're quite heavy relative to what the old Bostons were, then this will be interesting. So just ending up my Boston 10 run at Waverley Abbey. Not been here before, it's rather nice. An old ruin. So Boston 10s, oh dear. Somewhat tale to tale. If I thought that Zoomfly 3 were the worst shoe of 2019, I think these will take the prize for this year so far.